Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 687 for the 5th of December 2021. Richard Saunders coming to you from just outside the Skeptic Zone studios because the birds are going mad. The rainbow lorikeets and other birds, and probably Big Bird, who knows. And instead of trying to cover up the window in the studio and hoping for the best, I thought I'd just come out and let the birds chirp, which you can hear right now. If you Google rainbow lorikeet, that's most of the birds you're hearing at the moment. Anyway, what's coming up on this week's show? We're going to start with a bizarre story of a man who was fighting the lockdown rules when it came to having patrons in his pub. And he appeared in court the other day to face those charges. And it looks like he tried to pull a Swiftie, a little bit of a sovereign citizen on the judge. Find out what happened coming up at the top of the show. Then following that, another wonderful report from our dear reporter Shelley Stocken, who sadly passed away earlier in the year. And this report dates back from about 5 or 6 years. And it's all about twins. Shelley was a twin. And she talks about how people expected her to be psychic. Then from Melbourne, it's Michelle Bickersma, who yesterday attended, or observed is probably the best word, an anti-lockdown freedom rally. An interesting report where she lists some of the, shall we say, interesting placards and posters she saw along the way. What were these people chanting? What were they saying? Find out with Michelle Bickersma. Following that, it's the Australian Skeptics newsletter, written by Tim Mendham and read by Adrian Hill in Canada. Yes, it all makes sense. And to round off the show this week, Trove looks at references in digitised Australian newspapers going back many decades to homeopathy. Yes, the quintessential quackery. The definition, the dictionary definition of quackery, homeopathy. Stay tuned at the end of the episode for more announcements from me. But now it's time for me to actually just walk down this path here. And on the other side of the street is a little cafe, and who knows, maybe they have fish and chips. Haven't had fish and chips for a while. I think my dream is to have fish and chips one day by the sea, if you know what I mean. So while I check that out, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Now, as I said at the top of the show, here's a story about a licensee of a pub here in New South Wales who faced court because he was, allegedly, and now he's been convicted of breaching the COVID-19 health orders by keeping his pub open and not enforcing vaccine restrictions. And it's a particularly bizarre story which sort of is intertwined with conspiracy theories and, I suspect, freemen of the land. And this is a report from the local news service in that area, Singleton, New South Wales, the Singleton Argus, and it's by Sam Rigney, posted on December the 2nd at 11 a.m. Justice. Singleton licensee who took a stand on COVID-19 vaccination status fined. And this story gets a little strange. Bradley John Hill, the licensee of a Hunter Valley pub that repeatedly breached public health orders and refused to turn away unvaccinated patrons, walked from Singleton Courthouse on Thursday to cheers and applause and shouts of justice from a throng of placard waving supporters. And quickly, some of the photographs here, people holding up signs saying "Free Australia," and on the other side of fear lies freedom, something about tyranny. Another sign on a car says, "My freedom doesn't end where your fear begins." I think you get the idea. But the reactions outside had belied the reality of what occurred inside, a bizarre spectacle during which Mr. Hill refused to acknowledge who he was and was promptly convicted and fined $3,000. Mr. Hill had come for his day in court and had hoped to say something, presumably, judging by the signs outside, about the COVID-19 pandemic and vaccines. But Magistrate Mark Richardson was not willing to entertain anything but a plea, and things immediately got off to an unusual start. Unmasked, Mr. Hill approached the microphone and was asked if he was Bradley John Hill. "Mr. Hill is not in court," he replied. "I am Bradley John." Mr. Richardson then asked a sheriff to have Mr. Hill called outside, and despite the fact he was standing right there, Mr. Hill said nothing. The magistrate then asked the police prosecutor what she wanted to do, and she made an application to have the matter dealt with in Mr. Hill's absence, again despite him standing there. When Mr. Hill began speaking, asking Mr. Richardson if he had read his affidavit, the magistrate replied, "I do not recognize you, sir. You are not Bradley John Hill." Then, in a flash, while Mr. Hill was standing there, he was convicted in his absence and fined a total of $3,000 for 3 separate breaches of the public health order relating to having unvaccinated people at Singleton's Caledonian Hotel. And just scrolling down, I can see another photograph with a woman, and on the back of her shirt is "COVID is a scam." Mr. Hill then walked outside to a round of applause from supporters who asked what had happened, quickly declared it a victory in their favour, and asked if they could, quote, "come and have a drink at your pub now," end quote. There were about 80 or so people outside the courthouse in suburban Elizabeth Street, Singleton, on Thursday morning, many waving flags and signs that read things like, "Brad stood with us, we stand with him," or "We will never comply with tyranny," and one with "COVID is a scam." They played music and peacefully chatted while a large contingent of police officers looked on. Now, later on in this report, it says, according to court documents, Mr. Hill was fined on October 11, referred to by some as Freedom Day, the first day public health orders came into effect, banning unvaccinated adults from venues like pubs, when the police found that he was working at the pub without being vaccinated against COVID-19. And there's more there, and I will link to this in the show notes, but it ends with, he was charged on Thursday and got his day in court. Sort of. It sounds like he was trying to be a bit too clever. Also, it's interesting to note that doing the rounds online was a video by one of his supporters claiming that he actually won the case, or the case was thrown out, which is simply not true. It is now a matter of historical record. He was found guilty and fined. And it's interesting to note, too, that in another photograph here, on another website reporting on the story, this one from the 9 TV network, as it happens, we see a photograph of somebody outside the courthouse waving what we call the Eureka Flag, and you'll often see this flag being waved around at so-called freedom demonstrations. It's a blue flag with a white cross, and which runs vertically and horizontally, and 5 big stars over the cross on each of the points of the cross and one in the middle of the cross. And the Eureka Flag, it says here in Wikipedia, by the way, was flown at the Battle of the Eureka Stockade, which took place on the 3rd of December 1854 at Ballarat in Victoria, Australia. It was the culmination of the 1851-1854 Eureka Rebellion of the Victorian goldfields, where miners protested against the cost of mining permits, and I think it's a little unfair, though it has been done, to compare it to the Confederate flag in the United States. Nevertheless, it's something that's dragged out when people are protesting or they think their freedom is under threat or something like that. It's a reminder of a rebellion from another century. But getting back to the court case, I can't help thinking this gentleman at the centre of the court case may have received some very poor legal advice. But another strange story in the long line of strange stories involving COVID-19 and so-called freedom fighters. The Skeptic, the journal from Australian skeptics. Subscribe online to the world's second oldest skeptical magazine. Just visit www.skeptics.com.au and click the magazine link. There you will also find, free to download, almost 40 years of back issues. The Skeptic, the journal from Australian skeptics. Available as a physical copy or as a digital copy delivered to your inbox. Interesting claims, questioning, take stock with Shelley Stocken.
Hi, this is Shelley Stocken, and I think I'm psychic. Yep. I mean, I haven't accurately predicted the future or spoken to any dead people recently. But for many years, over and over again, I've been told by people, even people I hardly know, that I'm psychic. You see, I'm an identical twin. Now, when someone I meet discovers I'm a twin, a typical exchange goes like this. Oh my God, you're a twin? Yes. Are you identical? Yes. Do you know what your sister's thinking? Can you feel her pain? Are you psychic? Yeah, no. Many people are convinced that twins have a special psychic connection, that they read each other's thoughts, or that they in fact share a single mind. Where does this idea come from? Perhaps the first reference to twin telepathy is in Alexander Dumas' 1844 novella, The Corsican Brothers, in which conjoined twin brothers, separated at birth, continue to feel the pain of the other throughout their lives. Since then, the idea that twins share thoughts and sensations has been repeated over and over in books, films, and other forms of popular culture, to the point where it's become a widely accepted, if not proven, phenomenon. It's not unusual for twins to finish each other's sentences when speaking, or think of each other when they're physically separated, which only serves to confirm the psychic idea in some people's minds, including some twins. Some even make careers out of it. Most famously, Linda and Terry Jamison, otherwise known as the Psychic Twins, have built something of an empire around their claimed psychic abilities. More than just a sideshow of cute twinny coincidences, these twins, born in Pennsylvania and now living in California, have been making money from their skills for more than 25 years and claim to have predicted 9/11, several aeroplane crashes, and the Paris terror attacks. There appears to be as much evidence for the psychic twins' abilities as there is for any other celebrity psychic's abilities. But what about my own personal experience? I can remember my sister and I having the same dream on the same night when we were children. When we were a little older, out dancing in the city, I developed a sudden headache. Just outside the nightclub, my sister had accidentally been pushed over and had hit her head on a wall. One day, we turned up at a birthday party wearing the same brand and style of jeans, which we'd bought from the same online store during the previous week. And recently, without any prior consultation, we met each other at the airport wearing black suits, black shoes and black and white striped tops. We are constantly finishing each other's sentences. We can often manage to have a complete conversation using little more than a few grunts and giggles in our own special language. Is all this evidence of psychic abilities? Science says no. None of the studies done on twins show any convincing evidence of telepathy, ESP, or other psychic phenomena. For example, in 1993, Susan Blackmore and Frances Chamberlain performed tests on identical twins in which they were placed in separate rooms and asked to draw a picture, choose a photograph, or write a number that their sibling was thinking of. The researchers performed these tests under conditions that would indicate if the twins' performance was due to thought concordance, that is, thinking more similarly than other people, or ESP. The discussion of the study in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research says, quote, "In many everyday situations, thought concordance might easily be misinterpreted as a meaningful coincidence, as telepathy, or some other form of ESP. If twins have greater thought concordance than others, then they are likely to have these experiences more often. This in turn may encourage them to think they have experienced the paranormal or have psychic ability, whether they do or not." End quote. Dr. Nancy Segal, director of the Twin Study Center at California State University, also says no. When asked about the existence of an extrasensory connection between twins in an interview for National Geographic, she said, "I've never directly witnessed anything like that. Twins do sometimes say they can sense when the other is in trouble. Of course, when you worry about somebody 20 times a day, chances are that one of those times they're going to really need your help. That doesn't make it telepathy." Despite what Nancy Segal and other researchers say, the spookily frequent coincidences that occur with twins are still pretty amazing. At least they seem amazing, until you think about how many things happen that aren't coincidences. I mean, I'll always recall the night my sister and I had the same dream, but the many thousands of nights we've dreamed differently are easily forgotten. For every day that I've chosen the same outfit as my sister, there have been hundreds and hundreds of days I haven't. And that night I had a headache when my sister injured her head? It was late at night, I'd been drinking alcohol and dancing to loud music. A headache was almost inevitable, regardless of my sister's misfortune. Of course, amazing coincidences happen to people who aren't twins too. But if we already have it in our minds that twins have a kind of psychic connection, then that will influence our perception of an anecdote. For example, if you hear about two totally unrelated people who both marry doctors and both have 2 children 2 years apart, you might not think much of it. But if it's a pair of twins separated at birth who do the same thing, you might think, whoa. The experiences my sister and I have shared might seem incredible to some people and appear to demonstrate amazing psychic abilities. But they're really no big deal if you consider we grew up at exactly the same time and spent nearly every minute of every day in each other's company until we finished school. We still speak to each other every day. So we know each other better than most people can know anyone. We share the same memories, which are triggered by the same words or events. We approach situations and react to stimuli in similar ways. We're attracted to similar people and things. We have similar values, standards, passions, and puns. People often treat us as if we were the same person. With that kind of background, having the same thoughts and dreams seems rather less remarkable. Even so, I still think I might be psychic. At least as psychic as any other psychic person I've met. Now, just before I go, I want to say hi to my sister Jo, if you're listening, which I already know you are, of course, because I'm psychic. Also because I told you I was doing this and when it was coming out, and if you don't listen to it, I'll be pretty annoyed. But mostly because, you know, the psychic thing. Thanks for listening.
today. This is Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, proud to be a skeptic, and you can find out more about me at drkarl.com and get lots of free stuff there as well.
Hi, this is Michelle Bickersma, and I thought I'd share with you my experience of the freedom protest in Melbourne today. Looking out of an apartment window in Melbourne's northern central business district, I saw a small protest. Many of the participants were wearing fluoro, and I thought it could be the final throes of the anti-vaccine, anti-pandemic laws protests we've been experiencing in Melbourne on Saturdays for quite a number of weeks now. However, when I went down onto the street, I was encouraged to see that it was actually an anti-fascist protest with the usual crowd nowhere in sight. However, it was still early, and my niggling feeling that it was not going to be that quiet in the city was soon justified. On my way home from checking out the Christmas decorations around the town, I reached the protest I had been expecting to see. There was a variety of chanting. The people united will never be defeated. No more mandates. My kid, my choice. A take on my body, my choice, of course. And no passport, in reference to the vaccine certificate. And sack Dan Andrews, the Victorian Premier, set against a background of general chattering, festival horn tooting, whistle blowing, music, and even some Hare Krishnas, who I think were on the side doing their own thing, as I had seen them elsewhere minutes prior. It was peaceful at the time that I was present and included families and children, amongst some more slightly intimidating types, but interestingly, gone was the fluoro of the construction workers from previous protests. While I can't estimate the numbers, I was able to walk the length of the protest up and down for a few city blocks, taking photos, so perhaps it was smaller than previous protests now that the new pandemic laws have been passed through both houses of state parliament. The pandemic laws have replaced the state of emergency powers and have been hotly debated. They give the Premier and Health Minister the power to declare a pandemic and enforce restrictions such as vaccine mandates and mask wearing for 3 months at a time. Previously, it was the Chief Health Officer that had the power to declare a pandemic and issue health orders. This brings Victoria more into line with what occurs in other states. Strange that we are not seeing protests of this size in the rest of the country if the laws are so reminiscent of a dictatorship, but anyway. Amongst the protesters were bearers of the Eureka Flag. These flags originated during the unfair licensing system of the Gold Rush era and depict a symbol of the Southern Cross constellation. They usually symbolise the struggle of the worker against authoritarianism. There were also those carrying the red Australian flag that is used by the Australian Merchant Navy and has been appropriated by sovereign citizens during the pandemic. Finally, there were some regular blue Australian flags, one with mandated painted on it, one don't tread on me Gadsden flag, and even one Trump flag complete with a picture of the former president. There was also one Aboriginal Australia flag. I was curious about the placards so decided I would photograph some and include them in this report. I was clearly not one of the supporters, taking snaps with my conspicuous Japanese print mask, giving the thumbs down signal to any offers to join them. When a protester asked if I knew what they were there for, I refused to engage any further than nodding that I did. I did not fancy taking my mask off for a discussion after almost 30 people from the protests last week have received positive tests. I also suspected it was probably not worth getting into. There were a number of activists promoting political parties with placards such as the Liberal Democratic Less Government, More Freedom, and the Clive Palmer United Party Freedom, Freedom, Freedom. There were signs relating to the Premier such as Sack Dan Andrews, but no gallows carried in the streets this time. I did, however, see one inflatable Daniel Andrews punching bag. Charming. The various conspiracy theory groups appear to have been represented with placards such as Stop the Satanic Ritual Abuse of Children, Max Egan Woke Me Up, King, Dictator Dan and Sluggate are just global puppets, and Name and shame people who are killing humanity, with a list too long to mention. Make what you will of this one. Eureka Rebellion is fate. Lock up file Polly's. Now, Polly's is spelled P-O-L-Y-S, and I'm assuming file Polly's is actually pedophile pollies, as in P-O-L-L-I-E-S, politicians. Not sure. If there's one thing real vampires have in common, it is their reluctance to tell the world who they really are. Religious signs included, Lord, we can't afford justice. We need mercy. And we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but spiritual evil in high places. Some placards were about freedom with Viva la Liberté. When you trade liberty for safety, you end up losing both. The freedoms you surrender today are the freedoms your grandchildren will never know existed. Last year's mask is this year's forced vaccine, is next year's social credit system. Then there is Kill the Bill, Say No, with a picture of a sickle and hammer. If you have to show proof that you are free, then you're not. Nuremberg 2.0. Consent, not coercion. Safe state equals no bullying, no discrimination, right to participate. The green check isn't freedom. Say no to vaccine mandates, passports, stop segregation. And finally, in this category, this is a vaccine passport, and it shows a hand with the middle finger sticking up as a rude gesture. There were so-called health-style messages such as, Omicron is spread by the vaxxed. No to myocarditis in our young ones. Omnicrap. We need another booster. Wake up, Vic. There was also a theme about vaccines and children, such as hands off our kids. I'm not an extremist. I'm a mother standing up for her children. Where are you? And there was a disgruntled worker carrying a sign saying, no jab, no job, swim teacher shortage. Hashtag let kids swim. Finally, there were the We are not the sheeple style of placards. There was a quote that stated, Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. There was also the most humble, "We are the light." To end, I'll leave you with this one. They fear you. They fear you being aware. They fear you waking up others. They fear you speaking up. They fear you standing together. They fear you won't comply. They fear your power. They fear your intuition. What they fear most of all is we are the majority. We are the power. They are the bottom feeders without any life force of their own. This has been Michelle Bickersma. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Ben Radford, co-host of Squaring the Strange podcast. In these trying times, as we help each other out to hold on to hope, we want you to know that we're here for you.
Hey, what are you going on about?
Who's interrupting my heartfelt promotional copy?
It's me, Celestia Ward, your co-host. Really? In these trying times? That's the best you can do?
Well, I'm just doing what everyone else is doing. I thought...
That's not what we do.
Oh, for crying out loud, who else is here?
Pascual Romero, your other co-host?
Hey.
We don't do what everybody else does, Ben. That's kind of our thing at Squaring the Strange.
Yeah, we try to approach things a little differently than your standard skeptical talky talk show.
We do our own thing, bringing science, critical thinking, and skepticism to bear on issues of the day. We've got a professional skeptical author, Ben, who has decades of experience researching topics for a dozen books and thousands of articles.
And a cartoonist skeptic, Celestia, who knows her stuff when it comes to facial weirdness and the psychology of perception.
And a badass heavy metal rock star and tech engineer, Pascual, who brings knowledge of all things audio, plus a bunch of neck tattoos.
Squaring the Strange explores topics both mysterious and mundane through a critical lens. Monsters, panics, media literacy.
Okay, forget the whole trying times promo idea. But we have chupacabras and clown panics, right?
Yes, Ben.
Hello, everyone. It's Adrienne Hill here again from Canada, here to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics newsletter. This is newsletter number 137, and you can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every other week, complete with links to all the stories. Just visit www.skeptics.com.au. But now, let's get to the newsletter and see what Tim Mendham has in store for us. Hi all, it says. Well, Skepticon has been and gone, but the memory lingers on. And judging by comments, those memories are very positive. I certainly enjoyed it. But if you'd still like to see what went on, you can view recordings of all the presentations just by buying a ticket to the convention, and I recommend you do. Not the live event, unfortunately, but all of the content, just the same. Meanwhile, you can catch up on the latest news and articles here as we head into the silly season at the end of the year. Read on. Tim. Okay then, Tim. We shall read on. Psychics, abysmal record. You probably didn't know that the Queen abdicated in 2003, 2004, 2012, and again in 2020. Or that anti-gravity would become a reality. Prince Harry would be king, King Henry IX, Mark Latham, our Prime Minister, Hillary Clinton, the President of the USA, an ice age in Europe, and COVID-19 would just go away by December 2020. Thus, the character of much of the claims revealed in the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project, the results of which were released at Skepticon. Richard Saunders and his crew spent 12 years collecting predictions, over 3,800 of them, from over 200 of Australia's best psychics and seers in the 2 decades from 2000 to 2020, and the vast majority were wrong. Their success rate has been abysmal. Only 11% of their predictions were correct, with 89% either wrong, too vague, or expected to happen. The full story, in glorious detail, will be in the December issue of The Skeptic, the journal from Australian skeptics. And I have to say, what an honor it was to participate in this project for the last year and a bit. And I really hope that the international friendships I've formed will last a really long time, and that one day we're actually going to get to meet in person. COVID vaccines don't violate the Nuremberg Code. People opposing vaccine mandates, or COVID vaccines more broadly, have claimed that vaccines violate the Nuremberg Code. They say COVID vaccines are experimental and people have been coerced into vaccination. They say this breaches the ethical code drawn up after World War II to guide medical research and human clinical trials. But this argument is flawed. Here's why the Nuremberg Code doesn't apply and how to correct this misunderstanding. Don't forget that the link to this story is provided in the newsletter. Body language pseudoscience flourishing on YouTube. Surprise, surprise. A long article on the art of reading body movements and poses. Quote, in celebrity interviews and homicide cases, video sleuths are searching for the truth. But what if the signals are wrong? End quote. Anti-vaxxer tour of COVID-19 hospital goes awry. More than awry, one physician said what had been intended as an educational event at Russian hospitals turned into, quote, a circus, end quote. Evidence that it is, sadly, pointless trying to educate confirmed zealots. Even sadder is the fact that Russia is only 37% double vaccinated. Mysticism, pseudoscience, and Nazism. Long article on how supernatural ideas were widespread at the turn of the 20th century, especially in Germany, and how during, quote, the social crisis following World War I, esoteric and border science ideas became a powerful tool of Nazi mobilization directed at demonizing Jews and the left, end quote. A bit dry in places, but interesting discussion. Detectives of the dark investigate the paranormal. A short piece on a team of ghost hunters. What makes this one different is that it is a team in India, which you don't often hear about despite the common belief in ghosts there. If you can get over the sometimes awkward expression, it makes for some interesting, if brief, context. This is a growing phenomena around the world, marked significantly by people wearing military-style jungle camouflage at night. Horoscope believers more narcissistic and less intelligent. Psychologists from Lund University in Sweden surveyed more than 250 people about their beliefs in astrology and their personality profiles. They found that those with strong beliefs scored more highly in narcissism, but lower in intelligence. However, they also found that belief in horoscopes was linked to traits of agreeableness and extroversion. Nicolas Cage was a vampire. Based on an 1870 photograph whose subject looks like Cage, thus indicating that the actor is immortal. Actually, this story is not that silly, but it's another example of where the writers or editors should try to overcome the stilted English that detracts from the piece. The December 2021 issue of The Skeptic will feature a complete coverage of the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project, possibly the largest of its kind ever undertaken, and destined to be a reference for future discussion on the topic of psychics. But no need to wait for your dose of skepticism, as the September 2021 issue is available, with a major feature on some recent publications and one old one, and the in-depth response as to where there might be problems, plus a whole range of stuff on aspects of religions and a lot more. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. Contact the editor if you're not sure if your existing subscription needs renewing. Events. While some skeptic groups are running the regular skeptics in the pub get-togethers online, same talks but bring your own beer, an increasing number are returning to the live face-to-face format. Check your local guides to see when and where such activities are on, or if they are on, considering any COVID restrictions. Items of interest. Horrifying half-man, half-dog captured on camera. We don't normally reference these pictures. We get a gazillion of them every week, and most are extremely unimpressive. This one is more interesting than some because of an Australian link. But if you can recognize the half-man, half-dog in the pic, then you're better than us. And this doesn't look like the outback we know. Man claims he's found Bigfoot and made its video. Oh, not again. What's with these paranormalists who can't put two words together to speak gooder? And what's with people who post videos where you can't see anything? Honestly, 14 minutes of, quote, "Did you see that?" End quote. No. And funny voices and static on some electronic equipment wildly interpreted as messages from the dead. And there, we've just saved you from having to watch it. And that's all for this newsletter. Thanks for listening. I think it's time for me to find some more waffles upstairs and enjoy the rest of the Skeptic Zone.
I'm Mick West. In my podcast, Tales from the Rabbit Hole, I have extended conversations with people who have been involved in conspiracy culture. I do this for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because it's really interesting. These people have great stories about how they fell down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole, what they did down there, and what it was that helped them out. Sometimes I also talk to people who investigate conspiracy theories, and they have equally fascinating stories from the other side. Secondly, I want to understand how best to prevent the spread of conspiracy theories and misinformation, which is an increasing problem in a time when alternative media is exploding. The best way to do this is to communicate effectively with the people involved, and the best way to do that is with a nice long chat. So check it out, Tales from the Rabbit Hole, tftrh.com.
Now it's time once again to peer into those pages at Trove, at trove.nla.gov.au, the online resource from the Australian Government and the National Library of Australia, digitised newspapers, gazettes, periodicals, journals, diaries, magazines, and so on, going back decades and decades and even centuries. Now, in the past few weeks, we've been looking at various alternative medicines, and this week I thought we'd look at the poster boy, the pin-up, the archetypal quackery to beat all quackeries, homeopathy. Now, I'm sure Skeptic Zone fans don't need a lecture about homeopathy and what utter quackery it is, but it's worth swinging by Wikipedia, partly because I know Susan Gerbeck and the team at Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia have been looking at this page. It says homeopathy, or homeopathy, because there's two spellings of the word, is a pseudoscientific system of alternative medicine. It was conceived in 1796 by the German physician Samuel Hahnemann. Its practitioners, called homeopaths, believe that a substance that causes symptoms of a disease in healthy people can cure similar symptoms in sick people. This doctrine is called like cures like. Homeopathic preparations are termed remedies and are made using homeopathic dilution. In this process, the selected substance is repeatedly diluted until the final product is chemically indistinguishable from the dilutant. Often, not even a single molecule of the original substance can be expected to remain in the product. Between each dilution, homeopaths may hit and or shake the product, claiming this makes the dilutant remember the original substance after its removal. Practitioners claim that such preparations upon oral intake can treat or cure disease. And I'll just quickly read the last line of the next paragraph. The fundamental implausibility of homeopathy, as well as a lack of demonstrable effectiveness, has led it being characterized within the scientific and medical communities as quackery and fraud. Now, let's see what we can find in trove. Now let's begin in the year 1867. 1867, Geelong Advertiser, Saturday the 11th of May. Homeopathy. The following cure has been communicated by Lord Malden in a letter to the editor of The Field. And I'll spare you the voice, I'll just quote this quote. I have no wish to enter into a discussion of the relative merits of allopathy and homeopathy, but I simply wish to state a fact in the treatment of distemper. Last spring my young hounds, 30 couple, were taken with it in a very severe form soon after they came into kennel. They were heated under the old system, and I'll stop there to suspect that could be a typo. It should probably read treated. Anyway, it says heated. They were heated under the old system, and in a very short time, 14 and a half couple died. And their 6 couple lying in what I called the condemned cell with scarcely a hope of recovery. They were in the last state of exhaustion, and some of them stone blind. Being a strong homeopathist, I determined to try what the medicine would do for them, and sent for Mr. Moore of Upper Berkeley Street. One hound died half an hour after he came, but in 48 hours or less there was a visible change for the better in the rest, and eventually they all entirely recovered. I am convinced that if masters of hounds would only adopt the system, more than half the hounds that die in that fatal disease would be saved. Signed, Malden. Sounds like he's gone to the dogs, but this is another thing I will cover briefly. It says here early on, I have no wish to enter into a discussion on the relative merits of allopathy and homeopathy. And for those of you who don't know, allopathy is a term much loved by homeopaths. It's a sort of a way to put down real medicine. And a quick look at Wiki says allopathic medicine, allopathic, allopathic. Allopathic medicine or allopathy is an archaic term used to define science-based modern medicine. The terms were coined in 1810 by the inventor of homeopathy, Samuel Hahnemann. It was originally used by 19th century homeopaths as a derogatory term for heroic medicine, the traditional European medicine of the time, as a precursor to modern medicine. So there you go. It's still used. Yeah, they still like to use that term as if there's 2 forms of medicine, their own homeopathy, which obviously works, and allopathy, which they consider to be less effective. Now let's look here at the next entry we find from the year 1936, Glen Innes Examiner, Tuesday the 13th of October.
Formerly we were ridiculed and oppressed. Today we have a hearing,
said Dr. C.E. Wheeler of London in his presidential address at Glasgow recently to the International Homeopathic Congress.
There is a change in the medical world. The specialist is difficult to handle, but the general practitioner remains a hopeful subject for our appeal.
The form of that appeal must be twofold. They should represent their doctrine in the light of their knowledge. They are required to present their clinical results in a form that took more heed of prejudice and skepticism and allowed for modern scientific handling of statistics. doctors from 20 countries attended the Congress, says the Evening News. The principle of homeopathy was evolved over 100 years ago by Samuel Hahnemann, a German physician who believed that it was better to give a patient a small dose of a drug than a large dose. And as we remember, in fact, the patient gets no dose whatsoever. And here we have an interesting report, an interesting letter from a sort of an unexpected source. This comes to us from Education, Journal of the New South Wales Public School Teachers Federation, dated the 27th of July 2015, not so long ago. And it's a letter by one Robert Wonger, and it says, "Fund wastes money on homeopathy. I notice that the Teachers' Health Fund still includes homeopathy among the services for which it provides benefits. The National Health and Medical Research Council, NHMRC, website states that, quote, based on the assessment of the evidence of the effectiveness of homeopathy, NHMRC concludes that there is no health conditions for which there is reliable evidence that homeopathy is effective, end quote. When I asked the Teachers' Health Fund why it was still continuing to pay out on ineffective services, part of its reply was, quote, as a large proportion of our membership base does claim for alternative therapies consultations and attest to their effectiveness, it is unlikely that Teachers' Health would ever cease paying benefits for these services entirely, end quote. I had thought that teachers were educated people with at least some knowledge of science and the way it works. It seems, however, that I am wrong. Would anyone like to join me in, quote, snake oil service, end quote, or maybe a, quote, bitter pill that cures all ills, end quote? And that's signed Alan Torrens, retired. And we have a follow-up from the same journal from the 7th of September 2015. Consider the many. I fully endorse Alan Torrens' comments regarding the Teachers' Health Fund paying rebates for homeopathy. Fund wastes money on homeopathy, letters July 27. When there is no evidence base to support this, these funds could be used to increase rebates in areas where there exists evidence regarding the positive benefits of a service. It is time the Health Fund considered its wider members. Signed, Gordon Broadhead, Casual. Good on you, Gordon. And finally, again, in a slightly different vein, we have the Torrens News from Queensland, from Thursday Island, in fact. Queensland, dated the 2nd of January 2004, and it seems to be a review of a television show broadcast on the SBS network here in Australia on 8:30 Tuesday, 6th of January. Cutting Edge, The Alternative Fix. This US frontline documentary examines the explosion in the popularity and profitability of complementary and alternative treatments. Under pressure from everyone from consumers to Congress, and tempted by huge grants, major hospitals and medical schools have embraced therapies that they once dismissed as quackery. So accepted, in fact, have alternative medical treatments become that an entire center of the National Institute of Health is now devoted to it. But the question remains, do these treatments actually work? The Alternative Fix screening in Cutting Edge on Tuesday, 6 January at 8:30 p.m. examines the controversy over complementary and alternative medical treatments. A growing number of Americans have become disenfranchised with modern health care, leading them to seek alternative therapies. From acupuncture to homeopathy, herbal supplements to chiropractic, complementary and alternative medicine, CAM, has become a $48 billion industry in America, one that traditional hospitals and medical schools are now eagerly embracing. But do these treatments actually work? Are they safe? And have medical professionals put aside their doubts in the efficacy of complementary medicine treatments in order to cash in on a multi-million-dollar market? Cutting Edge, the alternative fix. Well, that's just a brief selection of the many hundreds of references to homeopathy in Australian digitised archives over the years. And as I said near the beginning of the segment, and yes, homeopathy is the textbook definition of quackery. Thank you to those good people at Trove who do the hard work in digitising all these journals and newspapers, and you can benefit, just as I do, by visiting Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, and you never know what quackery you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Where have the birds gone? They've gone a little bit quiet. Maybe they didn't get any fish and chips. They're not very happy with me. Oh, there's one. They've come back. Thank you, too, to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal at skepticzone.tv. And thank you to those recently, the recent new supporters. Much appreciated. And if you enjoy the show, if it means something to you, if you get a laugh, if you learn something every week, if it's part of your routine, and I keep you company together with my reporters, then maybe you can consider being a $5 or $10 a month sponsor of the show at Patreon. Again, just visit skepticzone.tv. A big shout out to my friends in Sweden. My friend Pontus Berkman from the European Skeptics podcast hosted me the other week, earlier this week I should say, as I gave a talk for skeptics in the pub in Sweden. That talk is online. It talks about my adventures in the Great Australian Prediction Project, and I will link to that talk in this week's show notes. Coming up on next week's episode, the Trove segment is going to look at seances, mediums, and interesting things like that. What was that? That's not a lorikeet. I think that's a noisy Indian miner up in the tree above me. It's a bird watcher's paradise. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off with my feathered friends from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.